when you know we're in a good spot. Okay, we're in a good spot. So that you know, guys, seeing as everybody's here, this is an actual meeting portion that we'll be talking about the budget, but this is out there. So um, you know, make sure when we're talking, we're talking well. Sometimes I forget that we have an actual meeting going on because we're just sitting here talking and getting used to these things. So Kathy will be joining us in a second too. She's just finishing some things up. What I really wanted to do tonight is expand a little bit on where we left you. I know we hit you with a lot of information during the budget presentation the other day, and not the rosiest picture to be painted as we go forward. But I think it's important that I double back with you a little bit, and I'm not bringing you a whole bunch of numbers other than what you've already seen tonight, but to get a really good idea of what we're hearing, what we're thinking, what we're planning on as we go forward. Because I think one of the important points that I look at is to say, if you look at the different options that we had given in that last session of where we thought we would be, and then talking about a 10 to 12% cut, which would be pretty conservative to make sure that we're looking in the right areas as we start to work forward, down to that really catastrophic look that is 26 to 28% of our budget. Again, with the whole thing falling back on, there's just so much unknown as to what we're looking at for revenues going forward and how this is going to look. So what I wanted to get some direction from you guys and some discussion into tonight is, first of all, are we comfortable of looking at that? We know where we were looking at the original numbers of about a 4.4 million dollar budget is going to be scaled back to right around 394 in that area. And if we're comfortable in that, that's where we should start planning from. And we have some of the numbers plugged in, but we would then, as we go forward to meet, those would be the numbers we would be discussing, but still understanding that there is some reality as this thing continues and as adjustments are made, we know this is going to have to be looked at consistently, because if we're seeing trends and putting some benchmarks out there that as we go forward, God forbid we slide towards this last column that we'd had, but want you to be rest assured that we've got some plans in place to look at that. So that's kind of where I wanted to just start the discussion of what I'm looking for from you. Keep in mind and Greg, you just sent something out a few minutes before the meeting. This stuff is changing all the time as we're looking at what are the possible revenues. I don't think there's any doubt that whatever the money is we're seeing flying around, some of it eventually has to get to locals. It's the idea of how is it going to get here? When's it going to get here? Those types of things. That's the unknown. If you look back to the original CARES Act, when it first was put in, when we first started talking about some of the stimulus money, Michigan received about $4.1 billion during that first round of the talk. Of that 4.1 billion, 900 million, 887, 888, but nearly 900 million went to the Big Five. And the Big Five in Michigan are the city of Detroit. I say the state of Detroit. That was a faux pas. I didn't mean that. But the city of Detroit, Wayne County, Oakland County, Macomb County, so Southeast Michigan, and then Kent County. And so that money was split, that nearly 900 million was split amongst them, which leaves the state with roughly $3.1 billion that came to them. Kind of what Greg had sent out with the MML, but what they had started, the MML, the county association and the township association all got together, really started to say, look, folks, we've got to look at some of this when it comes to the locals and some of these other units of government, and so that we're not passed over during this. They have been trying to lobby and work with the state of Michigan to say, and what they did was those units came up with a formula similar to what was generated to come up with the money for the Big Five that local units of government should get. And it roughly came out to about $1.2 billion that they're saying needs to be allocated to local units of government. But the question then becomes, how is it allocated? What's the process? I know that the MML, Michigan Municipal League, is looking hard at saying we don't have all the time to go through a whole bunch of red tape in this. The states didn't go through a whole bunch of red tape to get where they're at and what they've been starting to receive. How do our locals get their hands on it quicker? How do we do that? So I know they've done some formula work and they're trying to look at that. Seeing as that was on the 17th of April, Greg sent out an email just a little while ago about the same discussions that are going on. So as of this moment, a lot of that from the state has been crickets. We're not still hearing about what might that money get to us, how might it get to us at the local level, knowing we're going to have some shortfalls as we're looking through a lot of these things. Last night, or then I had sent you guys out an email earlier about, I think it was last week, about looking to the federal government as we were going through the next rounds of the stimulus money and talking about where that would go. How do we get some ties in to locals to make sure that some of that is earmarked for us? And actually, could there be a direct pipeline that came from the federal government directly to local government? I think we all know too, there's an awful lot of politics going on through this whole part of the process. There's been talk that McConnell basically said he didn't want to, this money was not going to be used so that locals can take their money and pay off their pension programs and their pension liabilities and the other issues that they have out there. And so these things get tied up in a lot of this talk. I will say late last night, for the first time, McConnell did make some concessions that he understands that some of this money needs to get to local units of government. We still have not solved the issue of what does that look like? What are the amounts and how do we get there? So I'm not, as we look at those three different options we had painted for you at the budget presentation 2 weeks ago, I have a hard time believing we reached that absolute 30%, 25, 30%, because there has to be some money somewhere, but we can't plan for that portion anyway. We would not be able to give you a budget by the 29th of May that says we're going to cut 30% of what we have going here. So I'd like to talk about that middle area of getting that to you. But the other portion of that I think lends some talk, I have already started, and Kathy started to do some preparation for what do we need to do. On the 17th, later in that afternoon of April, I sent a memo out to all of the administrative staff, really talking about, we've got two things coming up that are really going to face us here in the next little bit. First of that, functional operations. As we start to see some things opening up, as we're getting more talk about opening up, I asked them to really look at, from an operations standpoint, how do we open up slowly, like the rest of the state and the rest of the things that are going on from a functional standpoint. We have folks still working on some unpaid on call. We have brought back the rest of the DPW crew of all working. As you know, we went ahead and reinstated some things with the newest order. And so I asked them to look at some functional operations as to how that might work and look. But as importantly, how do you start to assess your own department financially? What are those issues that we know, if we're not seeing some of these revenues that we're projecting, that we believe are not going to be there, what are you going to do within a department? So I asked for them to get to me some plans within their own departments, first from the functional standpoint, secondly from the financial standpoint of how does that start to look as we go forward. And every department has submitted some ideas to me and some plans. We're still in that real early stage. I will tell you, there is a theme. The theme is, we don't like to talk about people. We don't want to get there, and it's a very tough discussion to get there, and I understand why. We also know that a good portion of our budget is made up of people. And so what I'm really bringing tonight too, is part of that discussion with you folks, is that says, I'm trying to be very, very realistic in how do we start this process for right now? How do we go forward? But I have to say something like, where is our appetite and what is our stomachs ready to start to look at? Because if we're talking about reduced revenue, we're talking about having to reduce services that we provide. So prioritizing those services that we may have to do, being very, very creative. I will tell you, the interesting part as I look at the department plans is we're a creative group of people. If some of the things that we've put in writing we can make work and they work financially, that will be very helpful on some of the things that we can do. So that would be nice to see. But that other portion is the only other portion we start to look at are people. And what we're trying to do is to make sure that we're not jumping directly to something that looks easier, that we're discussing it all the way through. There will be a point in time then as we put these benchmarks, and I'm gonna let Kathy refer to some of that a little bit better of how do we put benchmarks in to see where we're at along the way. But I want to make sure that this group has sat down together and I've done my due diligence to tell you that these are the things that we're having to explore. We're not saying we're doing any of that right off the bat out of the chute. But if we've put benchmarks in at a 3-month period or something like that, and we start to see things are sliding, we want to have plans that allow us to adjust back and forth as it goes, so that we're not making knee-jerk reactions, but we've actually had some talk about it ahead of time to do that. So those are my, again, I'm not the finance person, so I try to look at things through the best lens that I can right now and say, we've got a plan. If we start at that 10 to 12%, we've got a plan if things start to move, but we've got no plan for you right now if it slides to that 25%. That will be something that moves all along. We also have a savings. We do have a fund balance. And so we have to know, what do we stomach with the fund balance? What do we know? But we can't include that into balancing a budget for you on the 29th, that we're just going to take X amount out of the fund balance. That will be a process we would have to go through as we go through the year. But I guess, I'm coming to you really saying my recommendation and my idea and what we've talked about says, can we look at that mid-road, that 10 to 12% that we will then meet on the 7th of May, hammer out those numbers to be within that 10 to 12%, knowing full well that it might be worse than that as we go forward, but this is our best place to start the year from right there, and then be able to make those adjustments and to where we go in there. So I stammered through that. It's a hard decision to make as we go forward, but any input just on at least where we were at from that, and then I'll let Kathy get into some more specifics.
Matt?
Yes.
Let me play it back for you. One of the things I'm hearing is, any budget's only as good as the assumptions we make, and they're fluid at best. So what you're telling us is not our best case, not our worst case, but our most likely case is where we are right now at the 10 to 12% down, right?
Yes.
I think my argument would be that if you hit those benchmarks or triggers where we have to do more, we are better served with a couple things. One is, if you think of the budget as basically a financial articulation of our values, what are those things that we think, do we line them up in order of importance? And then what's our process to get there? I think the tail end of that may turn out to be positions or whatever, but I don't think that's where you start. I think what I'd be more comfortable with is, if we build a budget with what we have now, which is the 10 to 12, but then say, what's the process in place that we can follow if those triggers occur.
Okay.
So we have a process that we can trust that's at least rational. I think that's about the best we can do. I don't know how others feel, but that's kind of where I would be.
Thanks for that, Nick, because what I'm not trying to say to you, we do have an obligation to adopt a budget, before June 1st. And so what I don't want to do, and Kathy and I discussed this, I don't want to just throw a budget out there and say, see, we did it. And so we've fulfilled that obligation without you guys having a good understanding that we really believe the heavy lifting is going to start to come then of where are those benchmarks, what are those triggers, and that we have already started to have some of those discussions going down the line. And Nick, you kind of said it with the prioritization. I think that's going to be really important. And that's where I look at this next type of meeting that we would have together. And I'm not asking you guys for solutions tonight. I'm really not. And I understand that our role is to actually bring things to you, but I would really like to be able to have those discussions that say, as we get to May 7th, to have a deeper discussion, what are the priorities? What do we think as a city and as the unit? We had come up with some here a couple months ago, and we know that those are shifting now a little bit. And so we have to reset some of those going forward. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not at all the one sitting here saying, the easy cut is to look at people and say, because it's the biggest number. We will be creative. We will figure out every way we can. But I'm just trying to make sure that we all are on a page that understands that if it comes to that, we all have to have some of these discussions going forward and seeing where that one goes. So from there, and I can, yeah, go ahead, Roger. I'm sorry.
Just a question, make sure I'm on the right page here. Looking at the four bars, a budget that we have, the 2020, the 21 original, the 21 contingency, and the 21 post-COVID, that the 2021 original is pretty close to being not realistic at this point anymore, okay? Which is the
Correct.
4 million, give or take on each.
Right.
The contingency budget is real close to being a balanced budget. If worse came to worse and we had to go with that one, it's
Right.
off by what, $14,000 or something, but I think we can come up with that. And the other, the post COVID-19 is not balanced at all. We can't possibly adopt that budget by law. If we could
Right.
get away with adopting the contingency one, that might be a fairly good place to start. But I agree with Nick is that as we go down the road here a little bit farther, we can see what happens and how close we are going to be to coming in with that contingency budget. If it's looking like we're going south and we're going to post COVID-19, then we definitely need to have a game plan as to where is that other, how far is that thing off? $500,000, $500,000 off on that one. And we've got to have a good game plan going as to where that comes from. As you say, do we cut services? Do we cut people? What are we going to do? Am I on the right page with that?
You're definitely on the right page. And I think the other portion of that is we have a fund balance, and I'll let Kathy go through some of that. And we have to have a comfort level. And we have to, those have to come to you when we do any of those. If we deal with that fund balance at all, if we were going to do any of those amendments, it has to come to you. But my importance too is to think, I think we need to set some percentages, and we have some policy in place already, but we can't spend our savings just to get through this. It can help us get through it, but we know it's going to be a combination of things that we're going to have to look through at that point.
Absolutely. We looked within this last year, just doing some budget things as we build up a fund balance, is how much of that fund balance do we ever want to take? How
Right.
much of that fund balance stays as a fund balance no matter what? And I think we all pretty well agreed that fund balance, if there's any way possible, never goes away.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it would be foolish. It would be foolish of us to say, we'll get through this because of the fund balance. Thank God it's there. And thank God that things have been done well to make sure that has been sustained. But in reality, that's that rainy day fund, but you don't milk it all for the rainy day fund. And we need to make sure of where we're sitting in those circumstances so that we get there.
Right.
And so,
well, so what, and I'm not, maybe just being devil's advocate.
Sure.
I'm not suggesting that we take the fund balance to balance the budget. That's not what I'm suggesting, but what's the rainy day we're hoping for or waiting for in some ways, because, and again, I'm open to hear what everyone else has to say, but I have felt the 10 years that I've been on city commission that we have cut staff, and that I don't know how I'm anxious to hear what Kathy has to present and what each department has suggested, but I'm at a loss to understand how we maintain our services at the level of people we have right now. I don't know how it's either we make huge decisions that we're not going to do certain things. And I don't know at this point what extraneous things we have. So I don't know what to even suggest, or I'm hoping there's a lot of input to come, because I wouldn't know where. I felt we've been at fairly bare bones for a while, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know how we cut millions of dollars or $500,000. It's all a lot of money to me. So I'm open.
And that's a good point, Roxanne. And that's why, that's why I think having this open discussion to start now has to start somewhere, because there's nobody flush here, guys. There's not a department that's sitting here flush that we can say anything that we may have to do would hurt. There is no doubt that we may have to do it would hurt. I do think that and like I said, I don't want to get deep into a lot of these because we don't have a long session tonight. And I wanted to go through some of this, but I think on the 7th, we'll be able to bring you some more of those ideas that we're looking at that could be a possible help as we look of how do we creatively use staff? How do we creatively do some different things? Like I said, there's some creative people here who have put some stuff down on paper who understand more than you or even I do of where their limitations are within their own departments if we had to go anywhere else. And so I think there's a strong desire to make sure that we do everything we can to maintain certain things like that. I'm glad to hear you say that to a certain extent, Roxanne, because what I didn't want was to come here tonight and have people say, well, yeah, I get it, Matt, but the easiest way is it's people, man. That's where the money's at. So we've got to look directly at that. But I also get when you're talking about the fund balance of keeping it at a level, it's at a level. I'm not saying we don't use it. And I don't think we get out of this without using it to a certain extent. But I also don't think it solves our problem completely.
No.
And I think that's
No.
why I'm talking about some kind of balance and being able to look through that as how we actually manage this. I would rather manage this thing than just react to it. And eventually that's our only option left.
Sure.
So that's what we're trying to look through is how do we manage this? And those are some of the ideas that I'd like to bring forward as we continue on in this process.
Matt, I'd like to say, I think that the fact that you're putting it out to staff first is going to be key, because I think, just from managing my own budget with my own staff, which is on a much smaller scale, but when we get into times like this, and we have, because we're a nonprofit, I always take it to staff first, because there are times when things look good that they may have a little better wish list than when things aren't looking so good. And there are things that can be, that they can live without. Now I know that's Greg's laughing, and I know that's funny because like Roxanne said, we're kind of been at bare bones, but I do think people can get creative, and when their feet are held to the fire, there may be things in each department that can be trimmed back a little bit that might help. So I feel like rather than kind of panicking and getting too far ahead of ourselves, I think let's see what the staff can come up with and what they can do. I always look at people going last. I mean, that's always my last resort. Now that may be because of the culture I come from. We're a little bit more, we're smaller, and so we're very much a family, but I would look at cutting positions as a last resort. And I do agree with Roxanne was saying too about the fund balance, because that is for a rainy day, and it's raining really hard right now. And I think, I'm not saying deplete it by any means, because I also, in my line of work, have spent some time building a fund balance for this type of thing. But I do think we have to be realistic that it may be time that has to be touched. And then later we look at how to build that back up, because I don't know that it's going to get any, I don't know that the storms are going to be any bigger than this for a while. And this is kind of a big thing. So
I mean, I really appreciate that approach, and I'm going to be real honest. I'm from my position, and the reason why I'm trying to have this discussion before we even start to look at those specifics, on the 7th of May, or we start to get into a little bit deeper, is I think it's important for me also to have a flavor for where you guys are coming from. I don't want to try to bring you something that's completely unrealistic, and you're going to say to me that's crazy. I do think that the people know their departments better. You're exactly right. I mean, the idea of them being able to say, I do know exactly what you're saying. Yeah, I know we're bare bones, but we all know where those things are too that could help a little bit. I would tell you, one of the creative things you'll see in here is that we've had some discussion that says you're going to be an employee of the city of Alma more than you've ever been, as opposed to, in some cases, an employee of a department. Because if we have to creatively be able to move people through departments to be able to do things and do things more efficiently, the hold your feet to the fire Audra mentioned is kind of one of those now. It says, look, for us to do some of these things and do this better, this is the way we may have to do it. And I know it's a different way of doing things. And so I think we'll continue to explore that one right up front with the whole thing as to where we're going. So again, I keep stammering through this because this is so, I mean, we just hit a wall here, but the wall may be scalable. We have no idea right now. I mean, I think, but we have to be able to say, what if? And I think that, and what I really want Kathy to get into with you guys here a little bit, we're social distancing, even though we're in the same office, but we have some technical issues. So we're going to let her use mine to do, but talking about where would we look at benchmarks and where would we start to make, and how would we make some of those adjustments going forward? So does anybody else have anything there too? I want to make sure that everybody's having a chance, and I just have a good discussion on it. Okay. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. I wish I had better news. You know, I can say that we've got a very creative staff, and we've all been working really hard together to come up with solutions that are feasible and efficient. And we've come up with some really good ideas. You know, sharing employees. There's some opportunities through the state where we can do a job share program where we reduce some staff's hours by 8 hours a week, and unemployment pays the 8 hours, but then we keep them on staff. That gives them a 40-hour week. That helps us through this situation, helps us on taxes and payroll and everything else, and it keeps the employee with their pension status and everything else. So that's something we've considered. We've decided or talked about some clerks sharing different responsibilities. David did a great job last week of coming up with some creative ways to keep a lot of the capital projects alive, but break them down into pieces that we can do over 1 or 2 years so that we keep moving those things forward. Yet right now we don't spend a lot of money. So thank you for that, David. That was very helpful. So we've got a lot of great ideas, a lot of things we're moving forward. You know, we're hopeful that over the last 24 hours, we've heard some move from the federal government about a stimulus bill for local government. Fingers crossed on that. We can't hang our hat on it, but at least something's moving in that direction. But we're not going to put anything in the budget until we've, you know, it's signed and dated and we know that that money's coming. So we're going to get through this with a combination of all kinds of things, but we're going to get there. We're going to be okay. So, and I appreciate your support. Oh, so we were talking about some of the benchmarks, and I'll lay them out more in detail. I'll maybe even send them to you before May 7th. But what I think is really important is we say, well, we're gonna start the budget at this point, and we're going to have these trigger points or benchmarks that say, if we see this number trending toward this benchmark, then we have to start reacting. And the good thing about that is we know what those benchmarks are, and we also know underneath what our reaction is going to be. So we do all our planning ahead of time. If this happens, what are we going to do? So we can be more reactive to a problem. We can plan a little bit better than just reacting, you know, off the cuff. And we can also see it coming because we can watch the figures, and if it gets even closer, trend down that direction, we can make adjustments. So we're going to be doing a lot of that over the next year, and you guys will be involved, and you know, I'll be talking you till I'm blue in the face about, oh, this is where we are toward this benchmark, and you know, we're doing better in this area, worse in that area, because that's the only way you survive through this, is to make sure we know where we are and we know what we have to do, and we know those target points that if we hit them, we have to make other adjustments. So the staff's been great about coming up with ideas of how we're going to do those things. So I'm looking forward to bringing it to you, and as we develop them even more over the next week or so, we can actually send them to you ahead of time so you have some more, you can comment on them as well. So
Thank you, Kathy. That would be helpful if
Sure.
we had those benchmarks and we could kind of be watching that at
Right.
the same time too. That'd be helpful. Thank you.
And there are a lot of different options, you know. I've been shaking the tree looking for all kinds of grants and opportunities there. I've called a couple banks to see if there's any kind of funding that they're aware of. Anything we can do to have options. I'd rather just have all the options and then we can pick which ones we want instead of just saying, oh, we're just going to do this. So we're just doing everything we can to come up with as many possibilities as we can, so we're not surprised at all. So thanks.
grab here. Yeah.
Hey, Matt,
Yeah, go ahead.
are you talking to any other city managers to see, like, are they in the same boat we are, or what's happening?
You know, I think it's interesting. I've been on a number of the listservs and different things too, and to see, folks, there are some that if you're reading certain things, the world's going to end tomorrow, and it doesn't matter what we do. And then there's some who are like, when this blows over, we'll just go back. And but most people that you're talking to, and again, find a moderate in today's world is kind of difficult. But I think getting people. A lot of people are talking about how do we plan, and there's frustration. I'm not going to say there's not. There's a ton of frustration that says it seems like money. Those of you who've been doing this for a while, I'm going to say this, and you're going to laugh, but how come it always seems like the money flies everywhere except to local government? I mean, they're the last to be on anybody's list. It seems like so. There's that frustration, and the part that bothers me most about that, Audrey, is that. I think I've told you guys, I'm not the biggest on writing letters to congressmen, and I'm just like, oh yeah, whatever. I don't think we have any choice. We need to continue to pound on some of these things now to see. Senator Altman and Lauer did a little town hall call-in yesterday. And so, and they were able to talk about some of the things they're trying to push for local unit government to get some of this money and to see where it's at. Some people you'll talk to will say, well, I don't know why we're pushing so hard for this because we don't know really where the deficit's going to be yet. But like Kathy and I have talked, and we've all talked about, we'd much rather be out in front of this than trying to chase it after it starts to happen. Hey, I'd love for us to make all these plans and try to do this and we never have to utilize anything. That would be fantastic. But I think that would be, I think we would be remiss in our duties if we didn't do some of this. So it's strange, Audrey. It's kind of across the board. On how different people are looking, even those that say, I think this could potentially be something, some are not reacting yet. And I don't want to act like we're overreacting either. I'm trying to be careful of finding a balance here somewhere. I just want to make sure that as we move forward, you know that, man, this could be really, really bad and we have to make certain decisions but we got to start somewhere. And if we start here, understand as we use these benchmarks and we go forward, these are the tools that we'll have to try to make the adjustments as we go.
There are some communities that don't have options. They don't have
Yeah,
a fund balance.
if you don't have a fund balance at all, your options are very, very limited for some communities. I mean, you're really at the mercy of what stimulus money you may end up with. I even hate the word stimulus money, but that's what it is, I guess.
So can you be specific about what some of these benchmarks are?
I think in reality of putting out some timing and being able to see, I mean, one of the first benchmarks would be see what does happen to the revenue. I mean, the first one would be to see as you're looking at, can people pay their taxes in July? You know, there's debate back and forth. A lot of people's taxes are escrowed. This first cycle through may actually come through. I mean, we may actually get people to actually make those payments because they're escrowed, they're in there at this point in time. Next cycle may be more difficult. You'll see some of that. Do we start to see some of that stimulus money reaching us that changes us? We can control the expense part. We can't really, we really are not able to control a lot of the revenue now because we're not sure. And so a lot of it would be based on that, Nick. What are we seeing coming through, or what are some projections from a revenue standpoint? What does the economy look like? What are those projections starting to look like? Right now, if you hear anybody talking about, you can get whatever you want online right now about what are people projecting for the economy to happen and for, as we go forward with this. It's really hard for someone like Kathy to sit here and make decisions based on it because it's so widespread. Hopefully that stuff starts to narrow down a little bit where we have a better idea.
I think you would plan for not getting any of these things.
I'm sorry, Nick, go ahead.
I think you would plan for not getting any of these things and work like heck to get them.
And then moved in that direction. Utility bills, like Kathy said, utility. Remember too, we have enterprise accounts that have some things built in that are taken care of. So we're really talking a lot about the general fund stuff and hoping that where we're sitting, but if people aren't paying their revenue and utility bills and different things like that, we're gonna have to come back to you guys and make some decisions about, we've stopped anybody that's not paying. And I think through this month we'll get the final number soon. We had really good month of people paying their utility bills.
Yeah.
But we also have to remember, we have to be prepared, for the worst.
Yes.
But we also have to remember that we do have that funding.
Yep.
We have to keep it positive, we have the backflow, but we have to be prepared, but we don't want to use all our energy on the negative because yes, we have to be prepared. That's what our job is to be prepared. But we also need to move forward and say, well, we've been through, I'm sure I haven't been on the commission, but I'm sure that something rough has come along in the last several years and we've made it through. So the staff that we have know how to do this. So I just want us to remember to, we have that, like Audra and Roxanne said, we have that funding. So I just don't want us to get too negative. That's all.
No, Michelle, you just hit the nail on the head of what I'm trying to, that's where I'm trying to find is that balance. I want to make sure that there's that balance there. Last thing I want is to walk away from some of these meetings and it gets out and staff saying, oh my God, we're cutting everybody. And you know how
I
those
think
things
that
go
would be
like
like
wildfire.
everybody else. Like staff cutting is like
Yep.
the bottom of our list. Like we will cut everything
Yep.
possible before we even think of that or talk about it. I mean, we have to talk about it, but you know what I mean? Like,
Right. But that's where I'm trying to get, if we can get a good mindset of those, and Nick, you talked about earlier, those priorities. What are those priorities? And so as we bring you and you look at some of the CIP programs, some of those things, some of those are tied to money that's already there. And God knows we're not going to give money back. We're going to take care of some of those projects that have to be done. Although we also know some of the things we've been planning may get cut too, just because the state funding is not going to be there, and the damn roads are still going to be a problem because the money's not going to be there for some of those and those services that go along with it. So,
right.
I do think I choose to try to take the more optimistic route. I know that Kathy and I have had some discussions. I know from her standpoint, you're looking at saying, geez, this is the worst case scenario that can happen. So whatever we bring you, that's not the worst case scenario, looks like we did our job and we're going in that right direction. So it's striking a balance there of planning. And I think that's the key that we're trying to talk about is we feel that we can plan for these things that kind of go on behind the scenes and that we are checking in though and making sure that you know that we are looking at some of these triggers that would be, okay, folks, this hasn't happened to a degree that's helping us. So we're going to have to do something. And we want to know that we're ready to react and do those and that we've vetted those things out already ahead of time.
But Matt, the lower the budget is, the better it is for us. It's a lot easier to put things back in than it is to take things out.
Yep.
Thank you, Roger.
Yeah, that was Larry. Yeah, Larry, you're right. And I think that's where you look at this number. So we want to start at and Greg, you've used this term a lot. I mean, it's that we've done conservative budget in the past. We want to give you, I mean, it's a conservative look at where we need to start. And I think if we look at that 10 to 12% that sits there, it's really the only realistic place to start because I think that's something we can move off of. Number one, like we say, we can't budget for the really bad. And there's other things in between there we know that could be factored in. But in order to get us to that obligation that we have at the end of this month, and I'm not trying only to check a box and say the obligation's been fulfilled, but we do have that says, here's a balanced budget. This is where it is. But there's that knowledge that you have that we are going to benchmark it and there will be adjustments that have to come. And I've given you at least as much information as I can say as bad as this could be, those are some of the options we may have to explore. And I think we all hope they never get there. And that's the last worst case that we would have to look at. So.
Because this isn't over yet. We don't know how long it's going to last.
Kathy keeps reminding me of that every day.
Yeah.
The worst thing that can happen is for everything to go back. And back when the Spanish flu, there was more deaths in the second wave than there was in the first. And we got to make sure that doesn't happen. It's inconvenient what we're doing, but it's necessary.
We can only plan for what we're trying to plan for some unknowns. And I think putting some, call them contingencies, call them provisions that we've at least discussed and we know. And I think Kathy said it. It's like, so when this trigger happens, we can come with a solution as opposed to starting fresh every single time of trying to figure it out. But I guess my first time going through something even remotely like this from this position is to be able to come to you tonight and say, even as I got closer tonight, I'm thinking, well, and Audra called me, do we need anything? And I'm thinking, well, no, because I just really want to be able to set a tone with you guys that says, how important it is that we're open to having the discussion with you, that helping us guide us through this as we continue through this process. Because Larry, you're right, it's not over. We hope it doesn't last long. We hope there's no recurrence, but we would be remiss if we didn't understand those are all possibilities. And so we'll
Exactly.
continue. And that's why I say we can't just say, well, the fund balance is there and we'll end up spending it, because if this is catastrophic, I get it. Things, if they get that catastrophic, everybody's in such a bad boat, but we need to do the best that we can to manage for the longest period of time that we can.
Well, you're trying to put some order in a situation that there is no order.
There is.
And I think that's, doing as much planning as you can ahead of time and to have different options and variables is the smart way to go about it. So I think, in my opinion, you're doing the right thing.
I really just didn't want to come off to say, well, we're going to bring you a budget on the 26th of May and there it is. And now we're going to wing it from here. And we'd like to have some things in place that say we're realistic of knowing that it's probably,
Right.
it's going to have to be adjusted from there.
Mhm.
I don't, this is weird because we're not sitting in a room where we can say, well, if everybody's got to use the restroom or something, but if we're good, that was really my goal for tonight, was to really just try to lay some groundwork, try to lay some things there. I think when we get to the May 7th full meeting again, where we'll be having this, and unfortunately we'll be doing it this way. Again, it would be nice to be able to be in a room and do this, so we could have a really, really good discussion, but for that standpoint, we'll still be there. And I know we can't talk about other things just because we've got 15 minutes because we have a formal meeting that starts at 6. So keep in mind, whatever we talk about is part of the record.
Well, I'm gonna go roll up my windows in my car because it looks like it's getting
Oh,
cloudy.
that'll work. So,
So I'll be back.
okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna step away too if you're good with that. I'll be back.
Thank you. If we're good, everybody, then we'll set some things with the finance committee and then with the full meeting on the 7th.
Okay.
Thank you.